What's been your experience of the Ukrainian people and how they're bearing up under this strain?
I think every night I go to bed and I think, wow, just that, you go, it's their their adaptability, from them very early days when and I mean the very early days when you thought, God, they're doing well. Yeah, but they set the tone then, not running, and that was a kind of top-down thing.
Yeah, I've got my mug, I mean, that.
And yeah, that's it, It is like,
fuck off, get off my land.
We're not going. And I kind of wish that extended out of the country sometimes. It's an incredible spirit to come across, and you really don't see it that often. Yeah, I've come across it, and it's like once a genie's out of the bottle effect. They're not putting it back in the bottle. They're not. No matter what happens, however this pans out, Russia is not going to run Ukraine again.
No.
It's just not going to happen.
Hello. Our guest this week on The Edge is world-renowned British combat cameraman Paul Conroy, who famously worked alongside legendary American journalist Marie Colvin, who sadly died doing her job, reporting on the war in Syria in a targeted assassination by the Assad regime, an incident in which Paul was also injured. That story later was turned into a 2018 film, A Private War. Paul now lives here in Ukraine, out east mostly, near the front lines. And so we discuss how things are going on the ground in this country, in this conflict, his impressions of the battle lines, of the military and the people, how they are bearing up. But we also talk about war in general and what it's like to bear witness. And given the tense atmosphere in the United States, we discuss what it looks like when politics turn to violence. I urge you, especially if you are an American viewer, to watch all the way through to the end, and perhaps take heed from the lessons that we have taken about the true consequences and the cost of war. So, Paul, mate, thank you for coming by. I'm glad to have caught you at a moment while you're in the capital, because I know you actually spend most of your time out east.
Yeah.
So obviously that's my first question. What is the situation out along the east, along the front lines? What's it like out there?
Well, I was just down in Kramatorsk, which I lived there for about 6 months in the early days of the invasion. And then I think the Russians were at a kind of healthy 40, 45 kilometers away. I was just down there in the city. They're now about, I think it's 18 kilometers away, which brings them uncomfortably close. The city itself never really used to get hit by the occasional missile that the Russians were firing, but now it is obviously in range of a lot of different weapon systems. And, the biggest curse of the whole war really in many ways is the drone, because I was sat there and it was kind of quite amusing, because the people of Kramatorsk have got used to this slowly, like boiling frogs. They adapt to each new level. Yeah. And I just found myself one day outside, and it was still quite warm, like autumn sunny day down there cafe full of people having coffee, and you just hear a drone come in, and it would kind of fly down the high street. It was like watching tennis. Everyone was like, watch
It's
it.
bizarre.
And then it would land, and everyone would go back to the coffee.
Yeah.
And then 15 minutes later, but that's it, 15 minutes later, another one come in, which means they're launching from their lines, say 20 kilometers away with impunity. Kramatorsk is a critical city. It's got rail links. It's just down from Sloviansk. They're the last two real cities in Donbass that haven't been taken yet. And Donbass is the Ukrainian kind of fortress holding back, the Russians. So I don't think it's in immediate risk of falling, because the Russian rate of progress is infinitely slow. And they pay a high price for the progress. But the Russian advance means, which is more critical, is that they have kind of drone control over the highway from Izium, which is south of Kharkiv, to Kramatorsk and Sloviansk, which is one of the Ukrainians' main supply routes.
Yeah.
And that is an issue. I had trouble getting out of Kramatorsk to come back because FPV drones are now patrolling that road, which it really means that was the last clear, safe route for Ukraine to get weapons and resupplies to the front. So they have to counter that threat now, which is another step up, whether they'll put nets on the road, the drone nets, or they'll get military in to kind of take them down electronically and shoot them out the sky. Yeah. But they have to keep that highway open. And I think what we're seeing is that the last Russian push, because as you know, here come autumn,
it's
the
all
rain
mud
comes and it turns into a mud bath, and not a lot can move. It's not that there's a lot moving at the moment anyway, because progress is measured in meters, not kilometers and miles.
Yeah.
So I think this is the last big Russian push in Donbass before the weather's come. And, they're under the kind of, with America's intransigence on doing anything to force Putin to the table, they're grabbing land while they can. They see this as
the Russians.
The Russians.
Yeah.
They see this as an opportunity to act with impunity, which it really is. There is no pressure on the Ukrainians. There's pressure on the Ukrainians from everywhere,
a lot of pressure on the Ukrainians.
There's no pressure on Putin to step towards any kind of cessation of hostilities.
Having said that, though, and I've been out there as well. I've not spent nearly as much time as you have, but I've been out there as well, and it is very well defended, and it is territory that is going to be difficult to advance on for the Russians because of those wide, sloping, open fields that exist out there. And then you have these fortress cities where they're all industrialized, and they have smelting plants, and they have
a lot of positions that can be defended
and dug in. And that's what the Ukrainians have been doing throughout this entire war is, digging in and making Russians pay for it as much as they can. But you're right. Kramatorsk is a strategically really important.
And after Kramatorsk, once you get out of Donbass, really, which is, as you say, it's dips and vales and rises and low ground and high ground. Once you get onto the steppes, say Dnipro and backwards, then it's long, flat, open plains. That's a different ball game when it comes to, So I think, at all costs, they must be prevented from being allowed to get into that wide, open, flat territory, which is a lot harder to dig in and defend.
Yeah. Yes, I agree 100%, but also there's the obstacle of the river. So all of this circles around to the point of, what is your assessment of what you think? And I guess maybe we should talk about the Ukrainian forces first before we talk about what Russians can achieve. So let's do that first. What is your assessment of the current state of the armed forces of Ukraine, both their capability, their morale, their position? that kind of
Okay,
thing.
capability, I would say, is surprisingly good. I was out in March, April, about the time when America cut off satellite imagery and weapon supplies. You know, when the orange guy threw a bit of a tantrum.
Yeah.
So I was out with a frontline drone unit about 4 or 5 kilometers from Russian positions. And these guys operated the Mavics, but, you know, in unison with
The Mavic drone.
surveillance drones. So they would take off, you know, and we were in a very well hidden, deep bunker. And these drones would take off if they spotted. And I mean, these guys would fly over these devastated villages, you know, just destroyed. And they would see from a couple of 100 meters with the cameras, they would see a wire in the rubble, you know, and I'm sitting there going, yeah, I can see rubble. And these guys would see a wire, then the drone would hover. They'd use the kind of telephoto lens on the camera, and they would follow the wire, and it would go disappear into what may be a hole. And they went, there were Russian pilots in that hole. And within 12, 13 minutes, an FPV drone came with a warhead on, flew into the hole. Then they called in a Baba Yaga, which is a big heavy lift drone.
Prop thing.
With a 10-kilo presence on it. And he'd hit it with that. And just for good measure, they called in some 155 artillery. And they hit it, and they took it out. And it was kind of gave you an example of the way the war works nowadays. So that was their capability on the front. So nothing moved within this grey zone. And either side, you know, the Russians have a similar capability. But afterwards, they took me back to their warehouse where they keep and it was like this massive, it was an old agricultural building, but it was like an Amazon warehouse of death. You just had these thousands of rounds of munitions stacked up, munitions for every different, you know, munition for taking out tanks, people, armor, you name it, but they designed and built this ammunition themselves. So when I said, what happens if America cuts off military supplies? Well, they said, look, as far as the front line goes, we will keep fighting now because we make all this ammunition. And he said the problem comes when it comes to defending the cities, you know, the high value surface-to-air missiles, the Patriot systems, they can't just be rebuilt and, you know, copied and built. So protecting the cities was the main issue. But as far as fighting the war on the front, they are so developed. You know, they're the best equipped, best fighting army in the world, I would say at the moment.
I would argue. Well, certainly Europe.
Yeah. But, you know, when it comes to combat experience, you know, these guys have racked up years, you know, and not since just 2022, you know, from
going back to 2014.
So,
I remember when they used to rotate units through Donbass in the 2014-2022 period. They rotated constantly. National Guard, regular Army, Marines, anybody in uniform did a tour in Donbass because the Ukrainians wanted every single
to get
service member to have been under fire.
Yeah.
You know, so morale, how's morale?
Morale is remarkably good. You see and you hear a lot written that, you know, I'm sure they would love more soldiers. You know, I think any army fighting a war would also love more soldiers. So I don't think it's unique that, you know, I don't know because they're very, you know, you don't get the actual information of where their shortages are. But I'm sure like any army in the world fighting a war like this, they would like more soldiers. But morale, when I've been on the fronts, you know, the last few weeks, it's been good. You know, they're around Pokrovsk, you know, where everyone's saying that the Russians are going to break through, there's going to be this, you know, they've fought back, they've kind of severed little salients and got Russians trapped in there. So they are, you know, they're remarkably effective in their use of manpower and weapons. You know, they don't do the big kind of meat assaults that the Russians do. They're clinical and concise about how they do it. But, as usual, they're fighting with one hand tied behind the back, so to speak.
We'll talk about that. Capable, very capable, in a relatively good position as it stands now, as we record today. Not great, but they've still got defensive positions that they can hold on to, and the Russians have obstacles that they have to overcome.
Big obstacles.
That will cost them time and people, and morale is good. They're not going to crack. They're not going to rout. I mean, you and I have been to enough wars. You know,
there are no major collapses
when a military
coming.
or armed force is on their back foot and they're losing momentum and they're ready to be done. I've seen that before.
Yeah, no,
Ukrainian armed forces are
not
nowhere
about
near
to happen.
that.
And plus on the other military front, on the attack front, these strikes into Russia,
yes,
are absolutely having a major effect on Russian petrochemicals in general. But that 20% of production's been taken out, and Ukrainians over the years they've been on the battlefield have been they're incredibly good engineers and. As we've seen, so now long-range weapons are coming into play. Mm-hmm. And this has two effects. A, it has a real-world effect on Russia's ability to create and make diesel to get down to the front. So the logistics hubs are being hit, the refineries are being hit, and, one of the major byproducts of that is that, the war is being taken home to Russia now. So I think... where the Russians have been able to kind of bury their head in the sand and go, let's not think about the war. Now they have to think about the war because they're paying a hell of a lot more for diesel and petrol at the pumps. Yeah. Some stations are dry, some regions are dry.
And this is in September. This is in August, September.
Going into the season.
To fall and ultimately winter.
Yeah.
Are you going to sit in an 8-hour-long queue?
Yeah,
for petrol as a Russian in minus 15-degree weather?
Yeah, it's not going to be pretty. Yeah. So
that was Putin's promise to them, is that they wouldn't be affected. So I think but let's talk about the Russians a little bit. But what do you see with their military capability? Obviously, you haven't been on that side of the line, but surely you've been. Paying attention.
I've kind of seen the effects of what they have, and I would say they're the advantage they have, they do have these, seemingly unlimited supply. If you start on the small side, their drone forces, they now have the fiber optic drone, mm-hmm. which, because at a granular level, this war has been 2 trenches, 20 kilometers apart, drones flying between, and the electronic countermeasures. One side makes an advance, few weeks it takes for the other side to come around a countermeasure to jam that, and then so it's been this kind of micro stepping up of drone capabilities. And it got to the point where no one was making any real gains because electronic countermeasures were so effective. Mm-hmm. That's jamming and geofencing and stopping them coming through. There's a new actor on the stage now, and it's the fiber optic drone. And these are quite heavy drones. The amount of warhead they carry has been slightly reduced because it carries a big spool of fiber optic cable that it means it can be controlled, and there is nothing you can do about it. All the jammers, all the detectors, nothing works. Mm-hmm. And these are operating up to 30, 35 kilometers over the lines now, which is quite terrifying because when I was down on the road to Pokrovsk, you just see like these spiders' webs all over the hedges, and it's kind of like an optical illusion. You're thinking, what is that? And then you realize it's the traces. It's the fiber optic cables of hundreds
literally
of drones.
a spider web.
A spider web of very micro fiber cable. And you see that and you start to worry because, we all have drone detectors now, radio frequencies that'll beep if something's coming close. With a fiber optic drone, you don't get that. So that's, and the Ukrainians have them as well. I'm just saying, the Russians are producing them en masse. Yeah. So they're now like a new massed weapon. And they're causing chaos. They used them to great effect, the Russians, when there was a retreat from Kursk. And the Russians came in with fiber optic drones and used them in the rear echelons and cut off the escape, the reverse route. Mm-hmm. And nobody knew what to do. The only thing you can do is shoot them down. And these things are fast. So on that level, they've got the weight of numbers. Aviation-wise, they've still got a lot of active aviation on the fronts. So that means glide bombs, cabs, and fabs come into play. These are air-launched aerial weapons that can safely be fired from behind the lines.
Basically, Russian-held airspace.
Russian-held airspace.
And then they just drop them. Yeah. They're kind of dumb bombs with
dumb bombs with wings glued on them or whatever they've done.
So that they can go several kilometers. Yeah. But they're huge warheads.
They're huge, and they hit Kramatorsk with 3 of them in the center the other day, and that causes massive damage. So they have that, and then they also have the Iskander ballistic missiles,
which of course we even get here in the capital.
Which you get here, and and they're frighteningly accurate. They hit what they want to hit. Really, I was in Odessa, and I was watching. I was living in the port because it was cheap. Believe it or not. And they would hit individual ships. Yeah, they could target a ship from Crimea and hit it. So. They still have, and then they have the strategic bomber fleets, the Tu-95s. They're the big heavy lift bombers that fly off and release cruise missiles over the Caspian Sea. Yeah, which are the smarter end of the weapons scale. So they kind of enter Ukrainian airspace, then fan out and head to they go west. They come to Kyiv. They go to Odessa, but they have the ability to change the target in mid-flight. Yeah. So they will send them this way, and then they'll change position. And this has the added advantage of it lights up all the air defense radar. So they fly over a city, all the radar lights up, the drones flying around map it, and they get quite a good idea of where the Ukrainian air defense radars. So from the battlefield, from drones to the higher level cruise missiles, the Russians, are still making weapons, which is, if you think how long in we are and how long the sanctions have been going on. And, a lot of these weapons turn out to have American, Swiss, British, Chinese, all the parts, the electronic components. It leads like a list of UN countries. So,
yeah, it does make one wonder. But this is a different war. I've never been through a war like this before. War is war. The fundamentals of it, it's the same. But this drone technology, the sheer scale of the fighting. The largest land war in Europe since World War II, easily, and one of the largest wars, aside from the Iraq War, perhaps, that I've ever seen. What's it? What has this? How has this war been different for you from all the other wars you've covered?
I think the main thing about it is the scale of it. I think most wars that we've covered are almost like, apart from Iraq, where it was kind of countries.
Well, the mass and might of the entire American,
and that was
military.
a kind of, that was. In many ways, that was over before the tanks ever rolled out of Kuwait or whatever. Yeah. The Air Force, that mass air superiority, we just drove in.
Yeah, same here.
And it was just like, no one shot at us. They were just like, they were defeated from the air. Yeah. And, and this is different because this is, I remember Boris Johnson famously being questioned in Parliament about defence spending when he was still Prime Minister, and he was like, and he was just so scathing. He said, "We don't need tanks. The days of massive tank battles on the plains of Western Europe are over." And 2 years later, we found ourselves in trenches looking at massive tank battles on the plains of Europe. So this is more the kind of what, no, this is very First World, Second World War, trenches, massive airstrikes. This is like 1917 or 1939, but with modern weapons.
And not an insurgency against a regular army.
No, that's what I'm saying. Like when we were in Libya or whatever, it was the kind of insurgents, and Gaddafi's army. That is something that I'm more used to, that level
Me too. Yeah.
of war. But this is big, well-equipped armies, slugging it out, people in trenches. It's a war of attrition.
Yeah.
That we don't, and no one side has such dominance that, like the Gulf Wars were kind of shock and awe in Baghdad. And after that, any sensible Iraqi was, and then that did develop into an insurgency. But the actual invasion, the actual assault was overwhelming force.
Yep.
And, the Russians, even when they came in the very first days in 2022, they came with force, but they never, the amount of, to occupy a city, the Russians are lucky they didn't get to Kyiv.
Yeah, they haven't even gotten to an occupation yet.
Yeah, because if you get into an occupation of a city, you need to occupy a city. All the studies show you need at least a 10-to-1 advantage in numbers to come into a city and occupy it, because you have to take every building in every street, in every area, and hold it. You can't just go through, have a quick look, because as it happens...
And the only way the Russians would actually be able to do that is mass roundup of all men of fighting age.
Yeah, but then you have the trouble of, you had
on Europe's doorstep,
grannies sitting there with bottles of Molotov cocktails. So they are...
they would have to do some heinous things, the Russians, to subdue a major Ukrainian. And I wonder if Europe would have the stomach to sit there. I mean, they still beat their chest over Srebrenica. This would make Srebrenica look like a walk in the park, a Boy Scout jamboree. What is your thoughts? What are your thoughts on the international reaction to the war here?
Oh God, it does drive me to despair. I mean, I think this whole let's start at the top and work down, because I think that's the only way you can look at this. For many years we had, until let's say a year ago. What happened a year ago? Mm-hmm. Donald Trump got, there was a belief that NATO was there, and that Article 5 was like written in blood and stone guarantee. And look, I sat in Odessa watching the American election, and this is crazy. I'm not just America bashing now. This is fundamentally a major tectonic shift in how the world and NATO and security operates. I sat waiting, watching the election. I fell asleep about 2 a.m. in Odessa. The power went. And so I nodded off. And I thought, well, I'll wake up and pick it up tomorrow. It's bound to go on a few days. It's going to... And I woke up and the power was back, and I got the laptop and it went, Donald Trump is the 47th president. I was like, what? It's happened. It was only... it was so fast, and I was like, oh dear, that's not good. Instinctively, I knew that wasn't good. And that night was one of the largest Russian air raids ever on Ukraine at the time. So I think that set the tone. But I don't think anyone has been prepared for the guy who was going to come in and solve it on day one, which he later rolled back as always being sarcastic. But, when you see 40 different clips of him saying it, all sewn together neatly by a rather clever editor, it doesn't look like sarcasm. It looks like bloviating idiocy. And from day one, we have sat there and it has been like, oh, God. Mm-hmm. Oh, God. Putin and his mates in the Kremlin must be sitting there with chilled bottles of Stoli going, I I really cannot believe that Christmas came bearing such bountiful and wonderful gifts as that idiot in the White House.
Yeah.
They're running circles around him. He has Steve, I'm trying really hard not to swear here, Steve Witkoff,
Yeah.
a New York, let's call him an estate agent, because that's what he is. He's a property developer. He is one of the most ignorant, facile people ever to, let alone just walk the earth freely, but to be entrusted, to be sent against these.
I mean, Lavrov. Lavrov is easily one of the most adept foreign service officers on the globe. He would be a challenge for a top-notch diplomat.
Yeah.
And Witkoff.
Well, not only is he sent to Russia, he's sorting out Gaza, and he's sorting out Iran. You know, the blind faith, and trust me, I think there's nothing more dangerous on this planet than blind faith. The blind faith that Trump has in Witkoff. And that's why I say the Russians must be laughing. Yeah. Because these things are normally tackled by teams of experienced, knowledgeable diplomats, intelligence officers, briefings. You do not just send somebody in there. And that, for Ukraine, that is deadly. Ukraine is sitting there looking, international pressure and absolute resolution is the only thing that would cause Putin to even stop to breathe. At the moment, he's not facing that from America. And Europe are now caught, this is quite easily, you got America, the biggest contributor hardware-wise and financially to NATO. You got Europe sitting there panicking because we have underinvested in defence for years. So, it's not a case of, we'll take over. We simply can't because we spent all the peace dividends. And we did rely on America. I hate to admit he has a point. Our defence industry in Europe has gone to shit. So you got the Europeans panicking. You got Trump complying. And who wins from all of this? The Russians. Putin is sitting there. He is not going to stop fighting when in his mind, he gets fed a lot of shite up from his chain of command. So he thinks he's probably doing better than he is in Ukraine. But while he's got Trump fighting his corner diplomatically, and then you have Europe, and I think the Europeans, if you start at, Finland, Sweden, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Poland, they get it.
Oh yeah,
because they've got it on their doorstep.
Yeah, well, and they've lived under Moscow.
They know what happens. They know the playbook.
Yeah, they have the historical memory of what it's like to live under Moscow.
It's there, there are people who've done it. And as you get back from that, it gets, the sense of urgency gets a little bit more diluted. By the time it gets to America, there is no sense of urgency. They have the Atlantic Ocean between them. Yeah. And they have a fool in charge. I don't know. I really don't know if the Kremlin have something on Trump, whether he's just as dumb as we all imagine. I don't know, and it actually doesn't matter.
He is compromised in some way.
Yeah, some way he's an asset one way or another. He repeats
exactly Kremlin talking points, and it's not just him. He's got his entire cabinet and arguably his entire movement, which have taken whole cloth. GRU, I almost said KGB, GRU, Russian Moscow narrative talking points. And that is deadly for Ukraine because it undermines support for them. And a huge part of this is obviously it's actually information warfare, but a huge part of information warfare is using and abusing and misleading and all the rest of it, controlling our vocation. the press,
Yep.
the Western press, in my opinion, and I'm clearly biased because I live here, and I think this is one of the most important wars I've ever covered in my life, because it's going to determine a lot about the future of whether autocracy rises or democracy survives. And so I think this is incredibly essential, this war. But as from one old war dog to another, why is our industry fucking up so much here?
Well, it's.
I mean, there are people on the ground. There are people on the ground. I don't want to shit on our fellow colleagues.
No, I think
they're doing the best they can in the environment in which they work.
There are journalists.
Absolutely,
who are
100%.
absolutely. I will stand behind, and I urge people, to look out. They know they are. I think people in UK know who they are. People in America know who are trusted sources. I think that's part of the fabric. There are people, who risk their lives daily.
I don't want to be dismissive of those guys.
No, and they go out.
But it's the industry.
No, look,
what the hell?
You have, it's dying from the head down. Look at 60 Minutes. Look at CBS. Look at the corruption at the mafia shakedowns, at the heads of these people, these well-established networks that have been dismantled by the administration. They've been shaken down.
Yeah.
And that's, the rot starts from the head down.
Yeah.
I think, it's, and then you have, people who are not, I would, look, you have correspondents on the ground who I think are doing as good a job now as they did in the Balkans, in the Middle East, in Iraq. They are out there getting the information, getting it out. There is no lack of people who are good at their jobs on the ground doing these stories. It goes back to bureaus, it goes back to headquarters and broadcasters, and then, the control of that content, it's gone. The correspondent's back on another job looking for the next story. And there are certain newspapers that still do that. When I worked with the Sunday Times, we would get our story from the front and it'd go out and you knew it was unmolested, it had been tidied up. Mm-hmm. That was it. And there are still journalists who do that. I think media-wise, when you get into them studios and you have the need to bring in contrarians who just start repeating Kremlin talking points. That's where the rot is. That's where and they're doing it. They're doing it for clicks, because who's going to click on a well thought through analysis, or who's going to click on some firebrand ignorant piece of shit sprouting something that is going to
trading in conspiracy theories, because that's what tickles the amygdala, and the anxiety and all the rest of it, and the doom and gloom.
Yeah.
And,
I just think it's important. I think it's important that we have the distinction, though, because you and I both know of people now who are out there doing it, and then we look behind us. It's like, you kind of know what's happening around you, but you look back and there's this whole ecosystem developed of it. I don't know.
Well, there's guys, and also, I mean, it all comes down to I don't blame our colleagues on the ground. Some are better than others, obviously.
But it's always been,
as it's always been. There are the guys who sit in, a hotel room and read the wires and then stand in front of a camera, and that's that. But it all comes down to the lawyers and the accountants with these large media organizations, and that limits their ability. So they'll like fly in for 2 or 3 weeks, and admirable, great, come 2 or 3 weeks. But to understand the complexity of this conflict, you can't just parachute in.
No,
that's not a criticism of
the
those
organizations that understand. There are
organizations
people who have people out there just because you need to feel it, you need to hear it, you need them whispers, that comes with time, and there are people doing that, and again, financially, it's expensive to keep people here, but
Yeah, it is.
I think it's important, and I think they do see the advantage of that. It's the kind of, I think I'm more a mental war with those kind of studio-based.
Yeah. What I
It's
call
just-
I call them either armchair generals,
Yeah.
or the scrimmage line boys, the guys who like to look at maps, the guys who feed or consume all of this conspiracy theory and this clear information warfare stuff that comes straight out of Moscow, and they just buy it. And then,
it's
and
the
because
uncritical.
and now because everybody can be a broadcaster,
Yeah.
all you need is a camera. Any jackass with a camera and an internet connection is suddenly an expert on war and an expert on Ukraine or Russia or whatever. It's frustrating as hell for me. What do you think about the rise of these new forms of getting stuff out? I mean, guys that can come here with an iPhone,
I think. Look, I think the important thing is if they're going to do that, then my problem is with saturation of purely just images and video without the grind and the graph behind it. So, someone can take a photograph, put it on the internet, Instagram, TikTok, whatever it is, and go, look at this.
Mm-hmm.
And you go, okay, yeah, it's a tank shooting a building. But who's the tank from? Who's in the building? Why is it shooting a building? I need the journalism to me is that might be the kicker, the starter of the story. But I need to know why you show me a picture of a tank shooting a building. And, that can take a lot of work. That can take a lot of time. And as long as people stick to them principles, then I'm not bothered what format they do it in. When they are just here with an iPhone, if they actually come and they do journalism, but if they're just showing pictures and I'm not getting a who, what, when, why, where, how behind it, if it's just gloss or if it's just gore or whatever, I still want them to do journalism. Yeah. I just don't think they should be swanning around doing not journalism. What's the point? Unless you're going to inform. And, it doesn't matter if, I don't care if someone's on the Russian side and they do journalism, if they actually do truthful reporting. But I don't like the profusion of propagandists on either side. I don't think it helps.
No,
I think it gives the wrong impression of what's happening. If it's all just fluff, if it's all just pretty pictures and nothing's wrong and nothing, when things go wrong, it's just as much news as when things go right. Now, I'm not saying that. I understand the reason why. I understand the reason why they don't want you to show the faces of dead soldiers. I get that. That's not censorship. That's, that person had the right to dignity and privacy in death as well as life.
Mm-hmm.
So
and
I get
their
that.
families.
And of course their family, so that, and, people go, that's censorship now. That's common decency and respect. I get, and they don't want to announce the numbers of dead. They're the only two real things that I think are asked of journalists here.
Yeah, I mean, I know of some instances where the Ukrainian authorities, armed forces, government, whatever, have kind of pushed forward their narrative and had it accepted by journalists.
Of course.
But we have to make the distinction.
Yeah.
That while that does happen on the Ukrainian side of the equation, and I'm not really comfortable with some of it, but I do know some of it happens. Propagandism happens on both sides.
Absolutely.
But the Russian, I mean, there's no comparison to the Russian side. I mean, you fall out of a window if
look.
Sometimes
You
tell
know,
the
any
truth.
country at war. You know, Britain in World War II.
Yeah.
You know, they had ministries dedicated to pushing their narratives and study. That is as old as war itself.
Old as war, yeah.
You know, so that, of course, that goes on. And I think as reporters, I think here you can get around, you not get around it. There is enough to see. Because I think reporting on war is not just about, in fact, I think the most least interesting bit of it is the overall tactical military side. You know,
me too.
I think the most interesting bit is getting with the guy who's been there for 2 years, who's exhausted, and his unit, you know, who some are young, some are old, and that mix of people, sitting chatting with them and getting their stories. That's a far more interesting way of reporting.
Or the woman and her child who has moved on from not one, not two, but 3 cities.
The third occupation of whatever.
As the Russian occupation.
They're the real story. And
that's far more interesting to me.
I've had so little interference in me trying to get that stuff. I was just out the other week, just roaming around villages, meeting all. I mean, I was in these villages and they're like 4 kilometers from the front. And they're all in the 70s, 80s, 90s. Baking hot day it was, and they're all queued up in the sun with their umbrellas up. Just waiting for, I was with a beautiful army chaplain called Sasha who goes around with a van full of bread. And, and there were like FPVs and fiber optic drones strewn all about us. And me and him are just in this van, going to these villages where it is their last lifeline to anything.
Yeah.
4 kilometers away are the Russian trenches. And these old people just sat there and they were just absolutely wonderful. I loved them. They were just like, I was a bit like, how are they going to feel doing a little piece to camera? And they just, gosh, we'll talk.
Yeah.
And that to me is, you come out.
The only time I've had problems if, obviously if you're in a frontline position, they don't want you filming something that would compromise. And that's
completely normal.
100% legitimate. Every
last
army
thing you'd want to do.
Every army I have ever covered has always had like, hey, don't film that because that's
well, have you seen
secret.
The Russians have just, they filmed their super duper drone factory.
Yeah, and they screwed up.
Yeah, and they showed a bottle of water.
Yeah, and
some trees, some birch trees. There was one showed that's a separate one.
The other
toilet
one with the
door.
WC, he's got the toilet, so they could geolocate it because of the way the structure of the building was laid out and where the toilets were, and that.
So I get that.
So I get that. I get that. I don't have a problem with that. And I really don't think the Ukrainians have been unduly censorious.
No, look, there's 2 ways of doing this whole gig. You can either apply for your press promotions. We've all got our military press card. And then, you write to them and say, I want to cover units on this front. And they say, okay, you can go with this unit, that unit. Or most of the times I just know people who say, I can get you to that front. And you go anywhere. And as long as you're OPSEC and OSINT aware about what you're showing that, then I've never had a trouble. I've been at the very front with like top class drone guys, but it hasn't gone through any press offices. They're just like, don't show. And I do the courtesy of kind of going, is this all right? The skyline or the building.
Yeah, God forbid. God forbid. I don't want to put them in there. I publish something and it gets guys killed.
Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think, and of course they, natural things like no country really publishes the amount of dead. Understandable. That's morale issues, World War II, the British, we're like I was saying earlier, with the whole ministry of not telling people things, and
war is war.
It's war, and there's ways you go about it and the ways you do it. So I think they've handled it, for a country that
I want to ask you maybe one or two more questions, but one I definitely want to get to. So, but you mentioned like going right up to the lines, and there are these old people who can't easily leave, or are stubborn, or just don't want to. That's their home. But I asked you earlier about the morale of the Ukrainian armed forces. What's been your experience of the Ukrainian people and how they're bearing up under this strain?
I think every night I go to bed and I think, wow, just that, you go, it's their their adaptability, from them very early days when and I mean the very early days when you thought, God, they're doing well. Yeah, but they set the tone then, of not running, and that was a kind of top-down thing.
Yeah, I've got my mug, I mean, that.
And yeah, that's it,
Yeah.
It is like,
fuck off, get off my land.
We're not going. And I kind of wish that extended out of the country sometimes. It's an incredible spirit to come across, and you really don't see it that often. Yeah, I've come across it, and it's like once a genie's out of the bottle effect. They're not putting it back in the bottle. They're not. No matter what happens, however this pans out, Russia is not going to run Ukraine again.
No.
It's just not going to happen. And it's like when the rebels rose up against Gaddafi and Gaddafi fired and killed them. I just sat there with a fire going, well, putting that genie back in the bottle and it's not going back. You can try and you can squeeze it, twist it, push it anyway, try and get it. It's not happening. The Ukrainians are not going to be ruled by Moscow. If they come to some like bodged agreement, with a frozen front line and, all the parts of Donetsk and Zaporizhia that are occupied, I wouldn't like to be a Russian soldier down there.
No.
And I wouldn't like to be because there will be, even if, if say they overtook the whole country, just in fantasy world.
Right.
They occupied the remainder of Ukraine. It would be the grimmest place to live because you would have thousands upon thousands of sick soldier cells armed to the teeth. They were in hit-and-run operations every time you went to the shop, every time you turned your light out at night, they would be getting hit. And that is the reality here. There would be the world's biggest insurrection army.
Oh, it would make the Iraqi insurgency.
Yeah, it looked like playtime, So that's my opinion. That's the Ukrainian spirit. It is pretty unbreakable. Even the people, like I say, the old people, they're just, they've got to a point where, the hardest thing in the world is to become a refugee. I've seen this over 30 years. And every war I've covered, people will endure, attacks. They'll endure bombing. They'll see their friends and neighbors die. But down to a person, everyone who's left their home and become a refugee has told me the hardest thing to do is to pack your single bag and close your front door and put yourself at the mercy of other people. You lose every right, everything goes, and then you become another either internally displaced person or a refugee in another country, and you have no input in your life from that point on. So a lot of them will stay because it's very, very frightening. War's frightening.
Yeah.
But the thought of stepping into the great unknown, and I've never had anyone tell me the hardest thing they ever did was leave the home and step into the unknown. Because with an explosion, if you're in your house and you're with the person you love, you've got that.
And there's always a desperate need to hang on to the familiar because everything is chaos in a war.
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about something we touched on before we started rolling the cameras, and that is that there's a lot of discord and kind of chaos and tension in the States now. A lot of concern of, and even open talk of like a second civil war, which I don't give any credence to. But you and I have seen war enough time, and we talk about these kind of things. What I don't think Americans understand is what war really looks like. I mean, do you want to have to show an ID at a checkpoint to go to the next city, to go shopping at the Walmart? And, they're going to be young 19-year-old boys with M4s and 30 cal, on a Humvee so that you can go to the McDonald's.
Yeah, war has really come, I mean, if you think that the last war was the last war on American soil was the Civil War.
Yeah. And having seen war as much as you have, and I have, I mean, and you're a Brit, I know, but coming from kind of a Western perspective, I mean, I don't know how we can convey this better to people who are flippant about political violence.
Yeah.
Anywhere in Britain, the United States, France, wherever, it is a very dangerous, slippery slope.
And it seems to me as if they're in the States, in particular, that they are sailing very close to that wind of war. They're almost,
or some sort of massive political violence.
Because it's these things happen. They very rarely just all out a mad run to disturbance and unrest. It's generally by degrees. And, as we are kind of observers over there, we're watching it. And it's like, it's like the well-worn path towards civil unrest is being tread. And, and I understand that people don't want to believe that's where it's going. And it's like, well, if you don't want that, why, if the political, if Trump and his kind of whatever they're called government over there don't want this, they are almost treading a path that, we kind of know where these paths lead. Yeah. And if they don't want it, why are they doing this? The erosion of liberties, putting, militarizing cities is one thing. Militarizing cities who are considered opponent cities, like Democrat states, California, DC, which is its own thing. Mm-hmm. But, if they start going into Chicago, that they are dangerous paths, and they've been taken by, I think the intellectual mass of Trump and his cabinet could fit in that cup. You know what I mean? That's the danger, I think, is, Trump at the moment is surrounded by people who are intellectually challenged. Pete Hegseth, the war minister now, or the war secretary, just the terminology. Why are they doing this? If they don't, seriously, if they don't want this to happen, why are they doing things like the war ministry? Why are they putting armed soldiers into streets that, they have crime, but we have crime. Everywhere has crime. We don't necessarily send in the National Guard. And now the assault on the media, which has been running at a low level, but now they're shooting the big guns. They're coming out, and you've got the head of the FCC now advising Disney to get rid of people, and they're doing it. You've got massive big law firms are taking the hit, paying billions of dollars and doing pro bono. All the signs are like, it's kind of almost sitting back going,
and the conversation that's happening.
Yeah, are they driving the country to this? And like you say, I don't think people are prepared for what war actually looks like.
I am sure that Americans have no idea what war. 99% of Americans have no idea what war looks like, and not it's because it's, as we've discussed, it's not just the front lines, not just the bang bang, it's what it does to entire societies change. And what I am concerned about is the ease of use of that language that which you described. But in addition to that, I am concerned about the fact that also once things start, it's easier, once blood starts flowing, it's easier to start blood flowing than it is to stop it. So just one last kind of point about this or this conversation is we are in the information space, you and I. How do we win this battle when it comes to Moscow, Russia, the autocrats of the world who are using these guys, in particular on the right in the Trump world, in the MAGA world? They seem to be more susceptible to Russian information warfare campaigns. We're in the information space. How can we fight this battle better?
It is a tricky one. It's kind of something that I think of a lot, and I don't necessarily arrive at any victory point. I think taking them head on is difficult because they don't really want to. They don't want to engage in the head-on discussions. I think keeping discourse going is important, but a lot of the time, if you think about the model they use, we try to go, this is happening, this is reality, this is fact. I saw this, I witnessed this, I went there, I saw. And you come back and you tell, this happened a lot with Syria. We went, we saw, we reported what we saw. And then you get the kind of grey zone is flooded by people who don't have any burden of proof, who don't necessarily want to commit. The tactic is to fill the zone with so much stuff that the poor innocent person who wants information doesn't know which stuff. There's so much stuff. Mm-hmm. And that, that's a win-win for them because there's no burden of proof. They can say something, they can put it into the sphere, and it can be, and it's just, and I remember with Syria, people going, Paul, are the white helmets ISIS? And I'd be like,
yeah,
you know me, I was out, but even people I knew were getting this tidal wave of shit would come at them, half facts, words, and that is what we're up against. That comes out of Moscow, that comes out of the far right. You look at this stuff, I really use Twitter now, I look at it and it's like, the ignorance
and the clear manipulation.
Yeah, it hurts to see. So that's what we're up against. I think all we can do is say what we see, keep doing what we do, keep going. Actually, because there are people who rely on people going and telling us what they see and coming back going, this isn't opinion. This is a fair and accurate representation of what I saw. And, just hope that has enough cut through. I think there are still enough people who seek such reporting, and, what you're going to do, I think it starts early. I think we have to have almost a major reset where we get kids and educate them about disinformation, about seeing,
how to consume media.
There's, I think it's Finland and a couple of the Scandinavian countries are doing it already.
The Estonians, I think, do.
And I think that is critical, is to instill them from that age, because I think there are, there's there's a whole generation of people are beyond redemption. They're so far down these various rabbit holes that, to try and, you think trying to change one person's mind who's either whether it's on vaccine skepticism or it's the far right or the extreme far
The
left.
deep state and
try and
the-
try and change. You could spend a lifetime trying to change someone's mind. You can provide all the facts, all the information you want. You've got a guy running the American Health Service now as an absolute crackpot.
Yeah.
No, he is validating all of them conspiracy theorists about they are a lost cause. We have to start young now. That's the only way. It's a long-term project. Is just to give these kids the tools they need to walk into a world like that we've created with this information technology. It's new to all of us, and we're struggling through the best we can, trying to fight the fight we can. But for kids, they need to be armed to deal with this stuff.
But with the decision makers of the day today, the grown-ups of today, I sometimes feel like that Dutch boy with his thumb in the
Absolutely.
dam.
I completely agree. Yeah. I think I think it does take visionary. Like the people who are doing it. They've realized, we can fight this fight all we like, but it's them kids who are going to inherit what we leave, and unless they're prepared for it. So honestly, it's almost like we have to deal with the shit show that we have in front of us, and at the same time think the only way out of this is to arm the next generation with ways of dealing with this. You get on there and we'll hold back the wall of insanity while you kind of get prepared to deal with it. Yeah. It's a bit.
Well, I'll keep doing what I'm doing, trying to keep that thumb in the dam, and I know you'll do the same thing. Last word, narrative that Russia is an unstoppable force and inevitably will win here. Bullshit, yes?
Crock of shite.
All right, I think that's the most important ray of light of honesty and truth that we can get. That narrative has to be destroyed at every turn.
Absolutely.
Thanks for coming by today, Paul.
Pleasure, Phil. Thanks for having us,
Please do
mate.
stay safe when you're out there, and perhaps I'll come and take a visit, and we'll have a proper chin wag and shelter
stuff.
under some god-awful attack at some point. Again,
Take care,
thanks
mate.
for your time,
Cheers.
Paul.
Thanks for having us.